Is it on? Oh, hello everyone. Hello outside. Can you hear me? If you could all start filtering in, we're about to commence. Thank you. Thank you.
Check. Check 1, 2.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining. I just want to check at the back. Are we okay for everyone online? Great. Thank you, everyone, for joining in person and online. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for coming in so promptly from outside. It just shows you the power of the human voice, possibly the greatest instrument that we own, and how apt for radio and the update that we're going to take you through today. I may be telling you some things up front that you already know, but I think it's important to provide context to this update and to revisit where we started with our journey with RAMS Amplify, and where we currently are and where we plan on going to. And it's been an exciting journey. There's been lots of change, lots of challenge, and I think the greatest asset that we have in our currency is that we're able to adapt to what's happening in the market. And if I go back to before we ran the RFP, we were in a position where the catalyst for change was COVID. And unfortunately, our previous methodology did not allow us to collect any data. And there was actually quite a hiatus of data before we ran our RFP, and we now have RAMS Amplify. And the vision for this iteration of our currency was to never ever be held ransom by something like COVID ever again. And we had that in mind. But we also, we were thinking towards the future, and we were thinking about what did we want, and what did we want 10 years from now, 15 years from now, and we wanted to gear ourselves for that. And essentially we came up with a model where we had a dual currency. Sorry, I'm gonna click. I've skipped the agenda, but I'll get into that now. We wanted a currency where we would have stable claimed data, so not veering away too much from the diary that we had, but we wanted more accurate data. Hence, yesterday recall, which is widely accepted globally as more accurate read. But then we also wanted to have minute-by-minute data in the form of MediaCell. And that hasn't come to fruition. The vision hasn't come to fruition, and we've had to make many, many changes in order for it to come to fruition and for us to have reach and frequency data out in the market. But before I continue with talking about MediaCell, let me get into the agenda. So today we're going to be going through RAMS in its entirety. We'll be talking about some of the data outputs, what we're seeing happening, some of the changes that we've made, the changes that we want to make, and very importantly, we'll be having an update from Ian Garland, all the way out from Australia, who has done our modeling for our reach and frequency data, which has been vitally important in getting reach and frequency data for planning, buying, post-campaigning, etc. We'll also have Dan, the head of Ipsos Global Audience Measurement, who'll be coming up and giving us some insights into the global world and what's important in terms of measurement, and it's highly intriguing. So lots to look forward to. So I've already started on some background in terms of reasons for changing. But yeah, moving back to MediaCell and it not necessarily coming to fruition, we have taken the decision to pause the study, that side of the study. The reason being is that we've not been able to reach critical mass in terms of the sample size that we want, and that's a 4,000 strong sample size. Little did we know back when we chose this approach that there would be so much complexity in our market in getting personal meter up and running in a country like South Africa. But if you think about it, the challenges are immense. Load shedding, data costs, these things affect compliance dramatically. And when you've got a sample that's, you've got people coming in and out constantly, that doesn't create stability for something like a radio currency. So whilst this is on pause, it's not off the table. Perhaps it will come back in a different iteration, a different way, and this is something that we're working on. But in the meantime, we do feel like funds could be better spent, or should be better spent, in terms of looking at things like need states being associated with the currency, more sample, more diversified sample, looking at the minorities and boosting for those. In South Africa, we still have an issue with reaching the upper end of the market. The youth market, very, very difficult to get a hold of simply because of new POPI legislation. It's harder than ever to get the youth market, but we're always looking for the solutions. Sometimes the solutions take money, so we're allocating money where we feel it will best serve the industry at this point in time. So in terms of the currency, as I said, we wanted a dual currency that we were going to essentially merge. CATI-DAR on its own, with yesterday recall, does not lend itself well to producing reach and frequency data. Hence, the MediaCell data the vision was always to have that longitudinal data fused so that we would have a smooth transition into reach and frequency data. That didn't come to light. So we had to call on Ian Garland, who is a doyen of data science, modeling. He's done work all over the world, many, many countries, many different challenges. And in our country, we're no different. We've had to bring something to market that's never been seen before. Very innovative. Eyes are on us in terms of the data that we're sending out into the market, and so far, so good. The uptake has been great. That doesn't mean that job's done. We still have a job to do with our currency, and as I said, in terms of changes that we need to make to ensure that it stays relevant, healthy, and takes all market conditions into account. And with that, I think I'm handing over to Jude from Ipsos. Welcome, Jude.
I could leave you to speak, Gary. So we just want to take a look at where we are with the journey so far in terms of MediaCell. As Gary has mentioned, it has been postponed, but we have successfully gone through a process, and we think that there's learnings from there that we can all benefit from. We got to the point where we were able to actually set up, after recruiting out of 25,000 respondents, at least 1,800 where we had relative stickiness on the panel, so they were reporting in on a regular basis. And this comprised of two elements, the one being people who used their own instruments, which we refer to as the bring your own, and others where we provided them with a personal locked meter so that we could pick up the readings from there. Through that panel that we had obtained, we found that we were able to pick up good measurement in both radio, TV, and particularly with digital properties, and we were able to read through that information and validate it successfully. Now, the country being the type of country we are in, innovation always welcomed, but of course it does present its own fair share of challenges. And these are the challenges that we went through and found solutions for. The first one being that people are very, very protective over their data costs, because simply the costs are too high in this country. And so we had to implement a process of reverse billing. Another being that we look at cell phone penetration sitting at 84%, smartphone penetration sitting at 84%, but the reality that we uncovered was that on the panel itself, we had more than 300 different models of smartphone. And this is also understandable because people in South Africa don't mind buying a second-hand phone, keeping a lower model. But the issue that we found with that was then trying to use MediaCell with those in that kind of situation was a challenge, because a lot of the phones didn't have the actual tech to support what it needed to do. Another issue that we found is that panelists were very, very skeptical about using this app and what it does and what it's going to do. That we found a solution through, which is the process of constant counseling with people, speaking to them, and in particularly speaking to them in their own home language. We found that that established levels of trust and helped us to get people more compliant. Among the issues that we needed to solve was when we got to the point and successfully recruited a respondent, getting them to download the app meant that we needed a hotspot download. We needed to provide power banks because with load shedding being the issue that it is, people, the last thing that they will charge is the phone or an extra phone or an extra instrument that they need because they're using their electricity for all other things. Incentives do work, but I think anyone who's dealt with or handled the panel before knows that you have to be careful in terms of how you use your incentive so that it doesn't disrupt the actual normal respondent behavior. And this being the state that we were in, we found that these were issues that we needed to overcome. We found solutions to many of them, but it just became too difficult to continue to maintain. And what we're doing is taking the learnings from there and just putting it on pause for now, knowing that we can come back to it. So yes, there was all of the learnings from the actual tech development along the way, but more so, there was also learnings in terms of what the behavior of South Africans is. And I think this is something that everyone would be familiar with. First and foremost, your phone is regarded as a personal device. It's yours, and you're reluctant to share certain things with anyone. Second of all, people have had bad experiences with downloading apps, and it's chowing up all their data, and people just don't want to spend. And this is across the board. It doesn't actually matter. How many of you step into a room like this, and the first thing you ask, suddenly you become a teenager, and you want to know what's the Wi-Fi password, right? Because, yeah, you've got your data, yes, you are going to use it, but you prefer to preserve it for the things that you actually want to do. And then the final thing is that people love the idea of having smartphones, using smartphones, but are still not entirely up to date with what it can and can't do. So that was MediaCell. In terms of the actual Cathy Dar side, that producing the currency, there we started off first and foremost to build a stable sample, starting off with 300 a month, building up to 36,000 a year, and now moving on to 72,000 every 24 months. What we found there is, through the random digit dialing that we were doing, the natural fallout didn't quite suit the needs of our measurement, and so it was necessary to boost certain segments, particularly in the Cape regions, and as Gary mentioned earlier, the upper SEM market, as well as the younger market. Through the process as well, we started off with an initial questionnaire, which we've revised over time, and that is the process that we will continue to do, revising the questionnaire so that it's fit for purpose and it meets the needs that we have. From there, we've gotten to the point where we were able to load data successfully for planning, but there's also been a process that we had to go through in terms of tidying up what that interface looks like and ensuring that it provides the necessary data points that are needed, both for insights and for planning. And finally, we got to the point where we were able to fuse this data or model this data to provide reach and frequency information, which Ian will talk more about after this. Just a quick run through in terms of what the RAMS methodology is, and to clarify any misconceptions in the market, it's not a face-to-face study, it is a telephone study. So we don't have the issues of gated communities or anything of that sort. It does mean that there are other elements that come into it that affected load shedding, being that number one. I mean, load shedding in South Africa is literally becoming a curse word. But it does affect because towers are out trying to reach people, which means we then need to move over. If you couldn't get hold of someone this Wednesday, you need to move it over to the next Wednesday. I think that's sufficient for that. So the process that we do on our care center for dialing people, random digit dialing as we call it, RDD, is something like 200,000 numbers are generated each month. And from there, it yields the 3,000 interviews that we need. Interviewers dial these numbers up to 7 times before they decide that the number is not usable, and interview people in the language of their choice. Through the interviewing process, we check on the geographical location to make sure that we get that correct, and we then move on to do proportion checks against it so that we meet the necessary quotas. To do this, we have got high quality standards that we adhere to, where we ensure that all interviews are monitored on a regular basis. We have a quality team who checks in on this on a regular, listens in on interviews, listens to recorded interviews thereafter, isolates any issues or problems that may come up, deals with specific interviewers if they find any areas that need to be retrained. So it's a process of training and retraining, even though the questionnaire remains the same, because it's important that we remain consistent throughout, that all questions are asked exactly as it is on the questionnaire, that it is done in the language of preference of the respondent, and that people are comfortable through the interview process, and that they know that the information is kept confidential. An additional thing that we have on that is the use of our GeoLink app. This allows us to actually get a more defined and proper grouping in terms of the geotype. So what happens is, in field at the time while this interview is happening, the interviewer pulls up a GeoLink app. When the respondent gives the name of the suburb that they're in, it helps them to locate the nearest suburb and thereby allocate it, which is then later on used by marketing sciences for processing. So that's it. That's the background in terms of where we are or where we're moving along with the CATI Day After Recall survey. Then moving on to what are the results showing us in terms of listenership. We're finding this is something you know or you sense already, or you're seeing it in your own information. Yes, there's definitely a decline in traditional broadcast media usage in favor of the new media. That's definitely reflecting there. Radio declining in favor of music streaming, podcast consumption. Free-to-air television the same in favor of SVOD, and interestingly, reading remains stable irrespective of which format it is, print or online. And this is a snapshot of what radio looks like at the moment. 3 in 4 people listening to the radio on a weekly basis. An incredible high engagement time of 5 hours, 12 minutes on a daily basis. There's plenty of spots, advertising spots to fill. It extends well across all of the SEM supergroups, reaching 40% in medium and 31% in high. Also interacts and plays very well with other media, watching at 88%, reading at 56%, and of course social media 68%, messaging 76%, and browsing at 63%. Yes, we are getting the brand decision makers, we are getting those people who decide what brand to buy when, with 83% of those responsible for household purchasing tuning in. And Gen Z is also listening. They are there, they're listening to the radio. 28% of overall listeners are in that age group. They listen to the radio in a shared proportion of on an actual terrestrial device, as well as on their cell phones, and mostly at home. From that, getting into what our top 20 stations look like. Ukhozi, Metro, Umhlobo Wenene at the top, owning that portion of the market. And then we have more regional stations like KFM 947, YFM 5, and Heart coming through as well. Looking at our community stations, again, we've got Jozi FM at the top, Izzy Lo Mzansi. Did I say that right? Yeah, coming through as well, Esteta and Zimonele. And more toward the lower end, we've got Kwezi, Bok, Nkomazi, and Eden featuring in the top 20. In terms of listening patterns, the shape of the day remains stable. It's on a weekday and on a weekend, slightly lower, but still stable. Looking at the actual day parts that shape the day, we find the pattern staying as it is, with drive time on weekends picking up the biggest audiences, followed by the afternoon drive. This we know already. But what is interesting to see is that the midday and evening slots are still holding a sizable portion of the audiences. So only winding down when people get to the end of the day. Sundays are picking up more on weekends from 6 to 12. And now looking at the stations, top stations in the different regions. First of all, we find that radio overall across the regions is showing a slight decline. But that's not entirely bad news, because what we're finding is that the average daily time spent listening is up by 3 minutes in overall, and as high as 5 minutes in Mpumalanga. One area that we did find that is struggling is the Northern Cape, and we are able to attribute that to load shedding that occurred during that time. In the Eastern Cape, we've got Umhlobo Wenene dominating in this region, reaching more than 2.4 million listeners. Ukhozi, Metro, Algoa, all reaching more than 300,000. And it's nice to see a regional station like Algoa FM featuring in and among all of the public broadcaster stations in this region. For Free State, 2/3 listening to Lesedi FM. Radio 2000 and Metro, Motsweding, Ukozi also reaching there. Now Gauteng, which is the very diverse population in the country's economic powerhouse, it gives actually a very competitive landscape for radio because there's a whole variety of station formats and broadcast languages that are needed and are enjoyed by Gauteng dwellers. And in this environment, in this region here, we've got Metro FM reaching 2.3 million people, Ukozi, Lesedi, 947, just over 1 million, Motsweding and Tobela just under 1 million. YFM and Jacaranda getting to above 700,000. And what I find interesting is Radio 2000 and 702, 2000 having more talk format and 702 being completely talk format, also featuring in here. So a very nice spread of music and talk stations coming through with different languages. KwaZulu-Natal, Ukozi FM, of course, because the broadcast language is mainly isiZulu, it attracts 4 million listeners in the region, in this second biggest province that it is in terms of population. Gagasi, which broadcasts in English and isiZulu, and East Coast Radio, which is English, then attracting more than 1 million listeners each. And nice to see here as well, the community station Izwi Mzansi, I got it right again, featuring in the top 10 with an audience of just under 300K. Limpopo, very static in this region, Tobela owning the biggest audience and reaching just under 1.5 million, and Palapala coming in with just around 800,000. And Mpumalanga, the Gwala Gwala FM consistently holding on to around 1 million listeners, followed by Ikwekwezi, more than 600,000. And the Northern Cape, we got 2 different broadcast language stations coming through, Motsweding and RSG. I pronounced that one right as well, right? Okay, in the Northwest, Motsweding, listening to more than half of Northwest residents, and Lesedi capturing an audience of 500,000. The Western Cape, again, another complex environment, and here we find a regional station, KFM, taking the lead with just over 1 million, followed by Mshlobo, Winene, which is just slightly under 1 million. Heart, obtaining more than 700,000, and Good Hope, just over 650,000. RSG, 500,000, Metro, 400,000. Smile FM, and the community station Voice of the Cape, also coming through here with Radio 2000, all of them reaching audiences of just above 150,000. So I'm the local act, that's why it was short and quick, and I'm handing over now to the international speaker. First one for the day.
Thanks, Jude, and thank you to BRC and Gary in particular, for having me here today. Just a quick commercial break. Most of you don't know me. However, as Gary said at the beginning, I've been working in data analytics for media companies now for over 30 years. We run a data analytics company. For those of you that know the UK and the European scene, probably the closest analogy is that we're a bit like RSMB, Steve Wilcox's firm, but with an Aussie accent. So I'll use that to say, as I go through this presentation, please excuse if I mispronounce or mangle the pronunciation of your local language. I have tried, but I can't guarantee anything. So let's start with the big vision. And I think Gary sort of nailed it at the beginning that what we had when we started along RAMS Amplify was the concept that what we really wanted was a single source of truth that allowed us to get in-depth analytic data, in-depth audience data, and longitudinal data. We started, and as Gary and Jude have both attested, the prospect of actually joining it with MediaCell, which is the foundation, didn't quite work out. So Ipsos and BRC started looking at what alternate solutions there were. Now, a lot of these sort of issues have been confronted in other places by using typically a diary service of some sort. The challenge is that, as Gary's covered, in environments where we've either got hard to access environments, COVID-type situations, the placement of diaries and on a physical basis became hard to achieve, to obtain any sort of longitudinal data. Now, one of the things that we have done over the years across a number of international locations, develop fusion services. And typically, a fusion involves starting with a base which is typically a currency, and that's the recipient base. And then onto that, you then basically apply a donor base. We did some work here in South Africa in the late 90s with Nielsen, building one of the original attempts at an AMPS and TAMS fusion along the same line. Now, the reason I give that sort of background is that there is a way, using the RAMS Amplify database, to do a fusion, but on itself. And the objective is to take the day after recall, where we have in-depth detail on all the individuals about their yesterday listening and claim behaviours over the last 7 days, and construct a panel, a virtual panel of synthetic people that looks like every individual has got 7 days of listening, not just the 1 day. So the project for us was about building that 7 day. We also know, though, at the outset, that the analytic database that Ipsos and BRC produce, which allows you to do all sorts of detailed analyses, including device and claimed location of listening, the ability to look at reasons why data, all of that's in the Crosstab database that you have been receiving since the service started. So the grand vision is that from the same data set, you should get consistent reporting metrics, whether it's for the 7 day data or whether it's for the Crosstab database. And so our objective with the project is to give you both of those. And that's really the introduction to this project. And so what I wanted to do is give you a brief outline of the sorts of things that we've done, the validation work we've done. We've had a project team working on this now through the course of last year, and build, and the first release was at the end of last year. The next release will be is imminent, running through QC at the moment, and we want to give you some sense of not just what we've done, but where we're going. So we start with the day after recall database, and most of you would be familiar at least with the structure of what's inside your Telmar and Clear Decision data sets. It's individuals that we collect information, classification information like their age, gender, province, population group. We also collect, obviously, information like what they claim to have listened to, stations, in the last 7 days, and what they listened to in detail by quarter hour for yesterday. We take that information, and as Judith said, when we started the project, we were hoping to be able to use the full 24-month database, the 12-month database, that is the current Crosstab. We saw pretty quickly, and you'll see why in a minute, that we started to run out of people. We just didn't have enough sample to build this synthetic population. So the move to 24 months was important for us, because it allowed us to build the depth, it allowed us to create this synthetic data set and build a version of a 7 day data with consistency with the source data, mindful of the objective that Crosstab and planning, reach and frequency had to give the same results at the end. So having started with the 73,000 odd people, and this is the September data, the December data is about the same size, we basically then break everyone up into critical cells. Now, there's a lot of things that determine what stations and when you listen. Clearly, things like province, age, gender, and population group are critical, and to that end, in any fusion, there are typically two groups of criteria we use to link people together in the fusion process. The critical cells are those that have to match. We can't assign a man to a woman. We can't assign someone who lives in Gauteng to KZN. We need to be able to say that they're at least constrained in those regards. And so those critical cells, as you can see here, we project to the same population that you see in the Crosstab database. But what we do then is drill down into the individual sample that allows us to see how many people we have in the database that we can then use to link together in a fusion process. So conceptually, it's pretty straightforward. We take each individual and we need to find 6 other people in the database that we match. We know we interviewed person A, and in this case here, someone from on the Sunday. We need to find their partner, who potentially could be someone from the Monday, the Tuesday, the Wednesday through to the Saturday. And in this particular case, we need to make sure that we've got basically units of 7. And so the sample sizes here gives us some sense of the challenge that we confront. Even as we run through, to say, some of the smaller provinces, you can see that in some of the minority population groups that we're actually looking at still very small sample counts. And so part of the challenge of this project has been that as we link these people together, we need to do 2 things. We need to preserve the nature of the listening as they had in the original case, and also then provide a realistic and consistent with measures like the 7-day listening criteria across the entire Fuse database. To give you some sense of how we actually do that, here is a little more detail on a sample from within one of these critical cells. Now, is that blurry to you too? Yeah. The one thing here is, so excuse the sort of background chart, but basically we start with, in this particular case, we're looking at basically black female from an age group in Harteng, and we can see that basically we've got a number of them. If we take person 22, randomised individual, we can see them listening to Metro and Sweating in the first instance, and at between 7 and 7:45, which is the only section of the quarter-hour data, no listening. They might have listened later in the day, or they might have listened earlier. We then basically take that for all of the individuals within the critical cell. Now remember that we asked not just about the top 2 stations, we asked up to the top 15 stations. So each individual could claim to have listened to up to 15 different stations. And so our objective in this regard is that as we build these synthetic population, we're controlling for 2 things. They're listening across the day of the week, and the total number and different stations, and the volumetric measures that they spend listening to those stations. And we do that by building out for each person, and let's use person 513 here, who was interviewed on Wednesday and listened to Okosi. We then try and find people in the same critical cell who behave in a similar fashion. We try and control for things like station repertoire. So if this person listened to Okosi and Metro, then we would try and find, as far as possible, other people that listen to Okosi and Metro. If they claim that they listen to Metro, FM over the last 7 days, but not yesterday, we also try and reflect that in the Fusion process. So what we end up doing here is basically finding for each person a link. And you can see in this case here, we've got Monday, Tuesday and Friday. There's no Wednesday in this particular case, and then Saturday and Sunday, which is the listening, remembering that we had details on how many days of the week they claim they listened to as well. Now, it's important to understand that when we link these people, we're not just taking the first person. As I said, we're trying to match not just on things like repertoire and listening behaviours, but we also look at other dimensions as well, things that we know are important, like metro, urban and rural, municipality, and then coming down into SEM status, all the other things that we know are important to you, not just from a listening behaviour, but from a commercial imperative as well. This process has been developed over the last 12, 15 months now, and one of the key measures for us in any fusion is to validate against reference data. So in a traditional fusion where you might have a recipient database and a donor, one of the key measures is making sure that the currency measure, which is typically the recipient, and the donor measure are preserved. Now in Fusion it's rare to get exactly the same numbers, but you do want to see high concordance, certainly in terms of both volumetrics and rank order. And that's exactly what we've been doing as part of the validation with the project team. So when we start with a day after recall database, which has got a distribution of age, gender, province and the like, the Fuse data set reflects that as well. In addition, we've got other areas, I said, finer levels of detail, such as being able to break it down into SEM. We're using 3 groups at the moment, but we can also control for slightly finer grade socioeconomic measures. Likewise, we can see, and one of the things that came through some of the early iterations, particularly because of things like repertoire of listening, is the ability to control for things like metro, urban and rural, and the different behaviours as well. So there's a lot going on underneath these linkages. We continue to finesse them, we continue to refine them as we look at and measure the data sets that you see. The key for us in doing this was to make sure that when we generated a data set, we had the ability then not just to look at the quarter-hour data and the shape of the day and listening across 7 days, but also key measures important for the commercial purposes of reach and frequency. And so the ability for us to compare what is the claim behaviours versus what is the fuse behaviours that come out of the model data set was, again, one of the other metrics that we saw as a key part of this process. Likewise, it wasn't just enough to look at the 7 days, because it's easy, literally, just to do a crosstab or a tabulation on Monday through Sunday and determine how many people have heard the spots in your campaigns, 100 spots allocated across one or more stations across one or more days. The power, though, of radio is its ability to continue to grow its audience across subsequent weeks. And to that end, again, a lot of the work that we've done, leveraging data like the MediaCell data that we had as validation, leaning on our learnings from international markets, we have built a database that allows us to project out cumulative audiences beyond just the first week that is captured in the Fuse data set. We can look at RNF campaigns that then run to 4 weeks or to 8 weeks. Now, all of these use fairly standard international data models. We don't actually have 8 weeks of data in the data set from a reach and frequency perspective, but we do have a reliable way of forecasting what your total audience growth is beyond the first week. And they're basically the key elements that we've tried to bring to bear. We have, as I said, in summary, looked at the base data, we've looked at the profile data, and we've looked at reach and frequency data. And the objective then is to bring all of that together into the planning database that will appear in your software. The next step for us is to take what we've done, and as I said, we've got, the validation work has been through hundreds and hundreds of analysis and validations on comparisons between source and model data. That doesn't mean the work stops. We know that there is still some work to do on day of week allocation, and there's still some work to do on fusion in terms of frequency, how many days of the week individuals listen to. The numbers have a high degree of concordance, but we can always sort of tighten those up. But probably the most important for us is that at the moment we have a database which looks at the individual listening by quarter hour, but we don't have, alongside of that, where the listening occurs or how it occurs. Is it done through an AM/FM radio, or is it being done through streaming services? Our objective, like if it was a proper 7-day diary that we'd use as a base collection service, is to take each quarter hour and to allocate a sense of where it was listened to and how it was listened to. Now, the benefit of doing that is that then just looks completely like a quarter-hour diary service, and then from that we have everything that we need to build a version of the crosstab base which is consistent with the reach and frequency planning database in terms of things like last 7 days and volumetrics and frequency measures, into an analytic database that lets you look in the same way that you would inside the crosstab base you're seeing today. So the big vision, and we're pretty much there. We have a version of the 24-month crosstab base, which is now consistent with the planning base, and the December release will include both. So I think that the vision for us is now being realised, and I think that the great thing I can say, having worked on these sorts of projects, is that the nature and the demands that Jude outlined so eloquently in terms of researching and measuring listenership within South Africa brings its own challenges. the nature of the work that we've done in this Fusion project is also world-leading. I sort of want to recognise that. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you, Ian. We'll be having a test afterwards to check that you all know exactly how to model data. But that was excellent. Thank you, Ian. I think it's really tough to get across those kind of principles in the way that you did, because it is very, very technical, and it's been a steep learning curve for us, and we're still learning every day that we're on this project. So thank you, much appreciated. Right. Okay, so the way forward, as I said at the beginning, we are on a constant journey of refinement and improvement. Market research by nature is never 100% accurate, correct. It's never a 100% view. If it was, we'd all do the same thing all over the world and we'd all be happy with what we're doing. But each market brings its own challenges, and you have to come up with solutions to those challenges. And some of the way forward are minute details but very important, and then there's some bigger considerations that we're going to action. So first and foremost, it's about refining the data in a way that it is presentable to the market, in a way that it's intuitive, it's easy, naming conventions, priority of data, communication to the market when any kind of changes are made, any kind of updates are sent out, etc. So yeah, we're trying to make the ease of use even easier. In terms of enhancements to the questionnaire, so at this point in time, we've identified possible questions that can be taken out of the dataset, and don't all get shocked or upset. The questions that you need and you work with and that you plan with, obviously those remain, the critical questions. But there are some questions that have become redundant. And in removing those, we're able to become more efficient in terms of our questionnaire, the length, more importantly. So telephonic interviews, I'm sure all of you, your time is precious. I'm sure a lot of you have Truecaller on your phone. And when someone phones you for a business call, it's a split-second decision whether you take the call or not. Now imagine getting a call for research. The difference between saying, do you have 25 minutes to half an hour compared to possibly 15 minutes to 20 minutes, there's a big difference. And it helps us get more interviews, which helps us study, and it just makes everybody's lives that much easier, that much better to plan. You have a lot more faith in the data, and you're able to get the data that you need from the segments that you need them from. Further developments in terms, I mentioned it briefly. This is what's so great about our methodology, is that it is iterative. We are able to change as and when we need it, not for the sake of change, but in terms of what we're seeing out in the market. And I mentioned it before, the upper end is still challenging to reach. And as I said, taking calls, it's still someone's time. So there are different ways that we can reach the upper end. Hence, we're looking at a hybrid methodology for the upper end of the market, where we're incorporating online self-completion questionnaires, which are an exact replica of the questionnaire that we have, which makes it even more important to streamline the questionnaire and take out questions that are redundant. In terms of the youth market, we have implemented face-to-face recruitment because of POPI concerns. We're looking at other minority groups that have been hard to reach, because it's fine when you get the big populations in South Africa. It's very easy. There's certain segments that you can reach very, very easily. Now it's about becoming clever around, well, in terms of the interviews that we're doing and the number of respondents that are coming in from a segment that is large, we might take some of those interviews and go to the smaller segments so that we can actually get a read on them. And I always say this around the smaller segments of the market: you cannot weight a zero. You just can't do it, right? So these are the kind of things that we're looking at in terms of enhancements of the sample design, mode of interviewing, and becoming more hybrid where it makes sense. Regionally, we're going to be looking at nuances regionally because not all regions are the same. One mode of interviewing may work in Gauteng. It may not work in the Eastern Cape as well. And it's for us to come up with the exact right mix of mode of interview so that we're giving each region its fair share of the data as well as its time to shine. When it comes to radio, sample is vital. If you don't have sample, again, you can't wait. And that usually translates into audience. Not all the time, but for the more medium to smaller stations, sample's vital. And if you don't get enough sample size, you can't be included in the reach and frequency data, unfortunately. So we're looking at increasing sample in certain regions. Jude mentioned it. We've already been boosting, but it's about boosting further. It's about getting quality lists or larger lists where we can get to those minority groups in South Africa. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Dan to take us through some global insights. Thank you.
I think I can load it up.
Please bear with us, just getting the presentation up.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks everyone for being here in the room. Whilst the presentation comes up, I am going to say that this was the first time I actually saw this presentation, and so it's going to echo quite nicely to some of the things that I'm going to say. I promise Gary didn't pay me to say the things that I'm about to say. But my aim is really to inspire and also challenge you in terms of some of the themes that we're seeing globally and share some opinions as to where the radio and audio market could go. I may be doing this without slides, and that's okay. So we'll work through it. But I think, I can start a little bit maybe just to talk on a high level in terms of Ipsos. I'll take this opportunity, to give a little pitch. Who is Ipsos? I hope you know us. Obviously, we're a research company. Thank you very much. I don't have to do a pitch. There we go. And you'll all be glad as well. So Dan Wongchiman, Global Service Line Lead for Ipsos. So I head up basically audience measurement globally. That's for all the different media channels, but obviously today we're going to focus on radio and on audio. Sorry, I also tend to move around when I present, so I'm going to try and lock myself to this podium. But if the sound drops in and drops out, I apologize for that. What I really wanted to share with you are kind of 5 thoughts as to what's going on in the world, and really kind of, like I said, inspire and challenge you as to how the radio and audio market can grow. Because I really do believe that it can grow, and there are opportunities here in South Africa to grow at the same time. I said I wasn't going to pitch, sorry. One slide from me very quickly. In terms of audience measurement, in terms of Ipsos, actually that's gone forwards too far, so there we go. Clearly didn't want me to do the pitch, sorry. But in terms of that, Ipsos is obviously a research company. We're based in 90 different countries. From an audience measurement perspective, we actually conduct research and have data in terms of 70 different markets. We do 40 different national currencies. In terms of radio, we have 20 different radio studies. And here in Africa, we actually have 5 different audience measurement teams, including one based here in Johannesburg, as you've seen. So we've got a fantastic team here who can help in terms of helping you understand why, what's going on, and give you that independent, credible, authoritative data. The first insight I really want to talk to you about is really echoing what Gary just talked to you there, is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to understanding audiences and understanding research and understanding radio in a particular market. And the reason for that is every single market is different. Every single market has different nuances. If you take this market here, you've got 40 different stations, you've got local community stations, you've got 11 different languages. So we need to be flexible in terms of our approach. We can have a framework, but we need to adapt. The big debate that's going on globally right now is really, should it be declarative and recall based, or should it be passive and electronic? And actually, to be really honest with you, it doesn't really matter. What we really need to do is understand what is the need, what are we trying to measure, what are we trying to solve for, which will help you actually sell, more of your inventory in that way. And so both approaches have strengths and weaknesses. From a decorative standpoint, you can see here, one of the benefits of it is large sample sizes. So thinking about South Africa, for instance, understanding certain nuances, certain locations, that's why a decorative recall sample is really strong. In terms of passive measurement, I know that unfortunately we've had to pause kind of MediaCell, but passive measurement adds that granularity. It allows us to understand more depths in terms of a minute-by-minute approach. And so what we are starting to see, and this is something that we really need to embrace, is the rise of hybrid measurement. And when I talk about hybrid measurement, it isn't just in terms of decorative recall and passive measurement, it's also in terms of the different methodologies that we can employ. So, should we use more face-to-face? We're obviously using a lot of CATI here. Should we employ kind of Cowie in that way? How do we get the right mix which allows us to give the representation that we need for the currency as a whole? And so to prove this, I wanted to showcase kind of what's going on in Europe. And you can see here there is no one-size-fits-all. So what we really need to do is choose the right approach for the marketplace in that way. The second thing that I want to talk about is context. So we've done a lot of work, we've improved kind of the currency that's here in the South African marketplace, but we need to think about what the data is actually saying and understand that context really matters. Essentially because as we evolve, and we are going to be evolving this study, numbers are going to change. And so understanding the why the numbers are changing, how we're improving the accuracy is really, really important. Ensuring that it's a real change as opposed to a methodological change. And so what I really wanted to showcase here is some data from the NMO. Now you're all going to get shocked, but I'll explain a little bit why in a moment. So the NMO is essentially the BRC in the Netherlands. And so they switched essentially from a diary methodology to a passive measurement methodology. And when you start, you shouldn't really compare different approaches, but I am here just for the sake of context. You can see here essentially that the time spent by listener went down significantly. Again, you're all going to get shocked by this. You say, why the hell am I sharing this data? Well, the reason for it is what we learned from doing this is essentially that people in terms of recall actually were overstating the time that they were spending with radio, but they were understating actually their behavior with the variety of different stations at the same time. And so you can see here, in terms of the data here, before, on average, it was 2 stations that they were saying they were listening to, but actually with the passive measurement approach, you can see that it increased to 6.5. And so what happened is, by increasing, improving the currency, adding things to it, it gave a greater confidence to the marketplace because it allowed to showcase what were real changes. So what is the actual relationship in terms of how people are listening to radio every day versus maybe thematic peaks. So if you're thinking about TV, for instance, it could be the World Cup, which is artificially spiking that data in that way. So the learning here really is don't be afraid of small numbers. We need to understand the context behind the number. We need to articulate and showcase the why behind it, to really provide the confidence for it. And if you want some proof in terms of that, this is some great data here. So you can see in the first half when the NMO launched their new study, the radio market increased by 4.4%. And in terms of the latest results, it's grown by 9%. So in terms of having a credible comparative currency, it really can add value in terms of growing the audio market. One thing just in terms of MediaCell, so there was an audit, I know that we've put it on pause here, but I just wanted to kind of share the audit results that was done in the Netherlands. In terms of accuracy, it was shown to have a 97% accuracy. Hopefully we can bring it back into marketplace, but it is something that we need to iterate, we need to learn from. I think there were a lot of learnings from it. And so we need to kind of consider, what are the ways that we can do it, but it's adding that granularity, which is why passive is great. The third thing I wanted to talk about is kind of the transition in our industry at the same time. So when you think about radio, when you think about audio, there are a lot of changes going on. So we really need to think about consistent measurement and metrics to understand the different ways that people are consuming kind of radio and audio. We're in a world of transition right now. This is not new to you. I know that this is day to day for you. Going from FM to digital, going from radio to audio to podcasts, going from live listening to listening on demand. This is the world that we are in today, but it's actually a great opportunity at the same time because it allows us to bring in new listeners to kind of the radio and audio space. But one thing we need to consider and we need to think about very carefully is as we go more digital, there will be a lot of people that will say it's great because you're getting a lot more data. And data is really, really great. Every single new digital approach, every single new device gives you a data point. The thing that you need to consider is actually how that data is being collected and also what does it actually mean. Because a lot of big data actually is fundamentally biased. So it typically skews a little bit younger, it typically skews a little bit more to people who are technologically more advanced. So understanding the strengths and weaknesses of different data sets is really important to understanding how you can add that to a currency. So as we start to think about the different parts of the digital ecosystem, in terms of radio and audio, we need to start thinking about what are the metrics that matter. What are actually going to drive things forwards in terms of helping to add and justify why a marketer should be using radio and audio. Right now, for instance, when it comes to podcasts, people rely on downloads. Downloads is not a great metric, to be very honest with you. A lot of people get auto downloads. It doesn't mean that someone has listened to it. So as an industry, we need to start thinking about what are the things that matter that we need to measure, which will help you at the same time grow your revenues. The fourth one is really being prepared to evolve. So we've made a lot of changes in terms of, what we're doing with the BRC, in terms of improving the currency that's there. One of the things that we see across all the currencies, across all media, is that technology is changing the way people are consuming. So we need to really start to evolve in terms of how we're measuring them at the same time. The other thing that we really need to think about is privacy is changing. Laws are changing at the same time. The approaches that we use also are changing in that way. So we need to iterate. We need to think about what is the right methodology. Gary, you talked about having a shorter survey, for instance. We all know it is getting harder and harder to get people to fill in long studies. So we need to embrace new approaches. Ian, you showcased kind of new data science approaches. These are things that can help us really fill the gaps. So around the world, you're starting to see a rise of synthetic populations. This is a little bit of a buzz term in the marketplace, but actually it's a real important way to help us garner and gain better granular insights. And so what I wanted to showcase with you is kind of a framework that we use in digital, but actually is a framework that can be used here in South Africa and can be used for any media at the same time. So what I'm sharing with you now is actually from Ipsos Iris. This is our digital currency in the UK and in Australia. And what you can see is that we've got a variety of different data streams and data sources which we're pulling together to create a synthetic population of 1 million people. Essentially what we have is we have our establishment survey. That gives us our norms. That's allowing us to understand how we should be building our panel. We then have a 10,000 strong panel with people who have at least two to three devices, because we know that everyone have a phone, have an iPad, have a laptop in that way. And then we're also adding site-centric data to give us kind of that scale and understanding where people are going. As we bring it together, we started to realize that for some of the smaller websites, we needed to do a boost. So a little bit like here, where we're trying to target younger audiences with face-to-face, we realized that we needed to adapt that. So you can see as we brought it all together, we had great insights in terms of benchmarks, in terms of when we're delivering the data, in terms of how people are using the devices, in terms of the page views, and then being delivered through a population of 1 million as opposed to 10,000 panelists. That allows us to do much more things with the data set, which means you get a much richer insight as to what's going on. Now I said, how can the BRC kind of embrace this framework? And it is a framework. It's a framework for all at the end of the day. It's not an Ipsos proprietary solution. It is something that we all need to be embracive of as we think about different data sets. So we know here in South Africa, we've got the day after recall data. We know that we have establishment data, but we could maybe, which is the bit in red, start taking some of your log data, for instance. And so what I'm doing here is just sharing and challenging you to think about the different data that you have that we can add to to make this currency more robust and stronger in that way. You know, I talked about face-to-face for younger audiences. Gary, you talked about maybe alternative approaches for more affluent audiences. Again, this is things that we can add to the synthetic population to make the data much more robust and much stronger as a whole. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is really I fundamentally believe that the radio and audio industry can grow. So I wanted to talk about a few trends that are going on that are happening across different media, which maybe we should think about that we should actually tackle and take advantage of. The first thing is digital. So I know in terms of South Africa, TV is very, very strong in that way. There is a big debate right now in terms of attention. And this is actually a real good thing for the audio and radio markets. Essentially what marketers have realized is a lot of the metrics that are used in other media is all about delivery. It's not actually about people, because it's people that actually make that decision. It's people that choose to listen. It's people that choose to buy. And so in terms of that, when you think about radio and audio, when you put your headsets on, you're creating a real private space. Your attention levels are much higher. So we need to start thinking about how we change our narratives and take advantage of what's going on in terms of the attention space. You know, if you're driving in a car at the same time, you know, you might have Waze, you might have Kid, but you still got a high percentage of your attention which is listening to what's going on on the radio in that time. The second area I wanted to talk about is kind of cross-media. Cross-media is a big opportunity for radio because it's expanding the way that people can actually consume radio and audio. It's also a real interesting opportunity because advertisers now are trying to understand more about how people are consuming across different platforms. Currently, a lot of that is TV and digital. We actually, as an industry, need to be getting into that at the same time because advertisers are starting to put money into it. You know, we're seeing it, for instance, in the UK with Project Origin. We're seeing other kind of studies which are being funded there. It's an opportunity for us to really start shaping that debate and starting to grow kind of the currency that we have. The other thing with cross-media is it's changing user behavior. So if I think about myself, for instance, I think on a Saturday when I'm making breakfast, I listen to radio via the big screen. Why? Because actually it's my best speaker in my home. You know, I don't want to listen to like poor quality off my phone. So again, we need to think about the changing behaviors and how that improves and grows kind of audio as a whole. The other thing to think about is also programmatic. So I know programmatic is still in its infancy here, but programmatic is actually driving cross-media buying, which again can add advertising dollars back into the radio and audio industry. So if you take, for instance, Marvel, if you take kind of Disney Plus, they're starting to buy, or they already buy, digitally via programmatic. They've now started to extend in terms of their strategies in terms of digital out of home, and so that's added revenue into digital out of home. Why not do that in radio? Why not do that in audio? So we need to think about how we can actually leverage the technologies and learnings that are going on in the cross-media space. The last area that I really want to talk about is sustainability. Now, this is one for the future, I'm going to admit to it, but it is the battleground, I think, that is going to be of a real importance going forwards. And the reason being is I think it's going to change the way that people plan and people buy. So today, quite often, you know, when marketers are trying to buy, they're looking at total reach. They're looking at trying to say which has the highest affinity, which has the strongest affinity, which is the best one in terms of it. In the future, I believe there's going to be an intersection point between total reach and sustainability. Because actually, the more that you try and reach the last quartile, the harder it is and the worse it is from a sustainability standpoint. And so there's a real opportunity essentially for the radio and audio space to take advantage of this because with the data that I'm showing here. So if you look at it, a 30-second linear radio ad essentially emits 103 kilos of carbon, of CO2. Now, if you think about an online display ad, you know, there are trillions of them. In terms of comparison, it's a 4x difference. If you then compare that to a 6-second, so 30 seconds versus 6 seconds, online video, you can see there's a 5x difference. And then if you compare that to a 30-second linear TV, you can see there's a 12x difference. So really, this is an opportunity essentially for the radio and audio market as marketers and planners and brands start thinking more about their sustainability and their footprint, because they're going to start choosing mediums that essentially allow them to manage their outputs. With that, though, there are lots of opportunities that I've shared with you. We as an industry here in South Africa have to work together. And it's a key thing that we need to think about. We need to think about what are the metrics that we need to really drive in the marketplace. We need to think as a group how we educate the why and showcase the strengths of the currency. But what's more importantly, we need to really kind of stop fighting with one another, because to grow the radio and audio pie, we need to showcase the strengths of radio and audio versus TV, versus digital, versus all the other media. And if we grow the pie, we all win. So, in summary, essentially, I hope I've shared with you, some of the reasons and some of my thoughts in terms of what's going on. What I really want to convey to you all, essentially, is that audience measurement is an investment, not a cost. As I showed you with an NMO data that's from radio, there are a lot of other examples. For instance, if I was to talk to you about out of home in Australia, Ian, your home market, they've shown a 10x growth in terms of advertising revenues in out of home since they've improved the Move currency. So audience measurement really matters, because it gives that fair, credible, reliable basis for planning and it gives the trust essentially to advertisers in that way. It does need to continue to evolve. That's not me pitching for more money. Yes, we all want more money, but I'm going to be honest, if we don't evolve the currency, we're going to get left behind, because every single currency is evolving at the same time. So this is where we need to work with you to understand what are your needs to push that forwards. And then the last point, as I said, why does audience measurement really matter? It's because it builds trust. By building trust, you build credibility. By building credibility, you can grow advertising revenues. So thank you for everyone listening. If there's any questions, I'm happy to take that. Let's all work together in that way to kind of grow the radio and audio space. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You may now leave. We're done. Thank you very much for your time. Just one point that I just want to reiterate, and Ian did touch on it, and I touched on it in terms of the software bureaus and the data there. We do want to have 2 data sets available to you that correspond to one another, and that being that they'll both be a 24-month view past 7-day. So your crosstab data that you use for your insights will match your reach and frequency planning, buying, PCA data. With that, thank you and goodbye.